Okay, well, politics in early Christianity. So we ended last week talking about Herod the Great and the death of Herod. Herod died a really bad death. He died from kidney failure and genital gangrene, which is always a bad way to go. But when Herod leaves the world, he leaves things in a mess. And so Herod was once, he's called the Great for a reason. He did a lot of, for a lot of the bad things he did a lot of great things, kind of like Alexander the Great. May not have been the most moral person, but he did a lot of great things. And the same's true about Herod. Herod was a guy who had a vision of a strong, unified Israel or Judea as a military power on the Mediterranean and a force to be reckoned with. But ironically, when he dies, he's going to divide his kingdom and kind of bequeath it to his children in a way that his dream could never come true, which is kind of ironic. So this week we've been talking about the intertestamental period. This week we're going to be departing that because now we're in New Testament times. We ended with Herod, but this is what we're going to talk about today are the things that are a direct continuation of what we've been talking about, but now biblical Jesus is now in the world, and we're going to talk about things that are going on in the time period of the early church that have some relevance. And so we're going to have some more Bible reading than we have the past few weeks because the Bible hasn't covered this stuff we've been talking about previously, but now it does. And so we'll read some stuff. So Herod and his family tree. This is a mess. So we talked about a lot of these figures a couple weeks ago. We talked about Antipater, Herod's first son. We talked about Alexander and Aristobulus. Some of his sons that we didn't talk about is a man by the name of Herod II or Philip I or Herod Boethus. So he's got a lot of names. He is going to be an important son and kind of Herod's favored son until he's not. But Herod Boethus, Archelaus, who appears in the Bible, and Antipas, who appears in the Bible, and Philip II, who appears in the Bible. So where we talked about how Herod had his son Alexander killed and his son Aristobulus killed because they were more popular than him, and he feared that they might take his throne. And to be fair, there probably was some scheming that was going on. But he killed his two sons there. And then, in a typical paranoid Herod fashion, Aristobulus' daughter Herodias marries her uncle, Philip Boethus. Philip Boethus, Herod II, he begins to plot with his brother Antipater. And so Herod is going to kill Antipater, and he's going to exile Boethus. So Herod has now killed 3 of his sons. Do you remember what the famous phrase was that Caesar Augustus said about Herod? It's better to be Herod's pig than his son. It's better to be his hua than his huia, because he won't touch a pig because he's a Jew. He observes kosher laws, but he'll have no problem about killing a son. So it's better to be his pig than his son. So you got the mess. Aristobulus, before he died, had children. And remember, Aristobulus, this is Aristobulus IV, is a descendant of the Maccabees line, the Hasmonean dynasty. He has 2 children, Agrippa I and Herodias, who's his daughter. Herodias has married her uncle, Philip Boethus. He gets exiled. The 2 of them have a daughter together named Salome. And here's just some absolute wild family drama. So they're going to end up getting divorced, and Herodias is going to marry her brother-in-law / uncle, Antipas. And that's going to cause some consternation. In fact, that's going to cause so much consternation that John the Baptist is going to have something to say about that. And that's ultimately going to result in John the Baptist's death when Salome dances before her. What even is that relationship? Her great uncle, stepfather, something, and she requests the head of John the Baptist, which you can see in that picture back there. So that's going to be an issue. Later, you're going to have Salome marries her great uncle slash, I don't even know what the relationship is. She's going to marry Philip II, and that's going to be a mess. Then her uncle Agrippa is going to have an actual kind of normal marriage for once. He's going to have 3 children: Agrippa II, Bernice or Bernike, and Drusilla, who you probably recognize all those names from the book of Acts. But Agrippa the First's normality, I guess, isn't going to last. And Agrippa II is going to have an incestuous marriage with his sister. And then Drusilla is going to marry a Roman procurator, Felix. So quite the mess. If your family tree looks like this, I think you need to do some self-reflection. You have erred somewhere along the way. But here's an interesting fact about Drusilla. Drusilla is going to, if it is the same Drusilla, which it probably is, she's going to die at Pompeii, with Mount Vesuvius that erupts. She's going to die in that eruption, which is kind of interesting. And so will Pliny the Elder, if you know who he is from your history. So that's kind of, these are the people we're going to talk about today. And this is a mess, and it's not surprising. We've talked about a lot of family messes with the first generation of Hasmoneans, the Maccabees. Then we talked about big family messes with the Hasmoneans, and you got brothers killing brothers and all that kind of mess. And is it any surprise that the mess continues? They come from pretty messed up homes, but I guess they come across it honestly. But the mess will continue. So let's talk about the tetrarchs. So when Herod dies, he does not bequeath his kingdom to any one child. He gives it to many children. And so his 3 remaining sons that he has any care for, he killed the 3, he exiled the 1, and then there's the remaining 3. They're going to get his territory, but they're going to get it all chopped up, and it's going to be very divided. What does the term tetrarch mean again? Yeah, 4 rulers, essentially. It's kind of a misnomer because there's not going to necessarily need to be 4 rulers, but it refers to a territory that's been divided several ways. And so in this case, there's going to be 3 tetrarchs, which triarch, I guess, I don't know. So you got Archelaus. He's the first one. He's going to be in charge from 4 BC to about 6 AD. And he's going to be the governor of Judea, Samaria, and Idumea, or however you say it. So he's mentioned in the Bible. So turn over, look at Matthew chapter 2. Look at verses 19 through 23. When Jesus is with his... When Mary, Joseph, and Jesus, they flee down to Egypt. This is what's said. But when Herod died, that would be Herod the Great, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt, saying, "Rise, take this child and his mother and go to the land of Israel, for those who sought the child's life are dead." And he rose and took the child to his mother and went to the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus was reigning over Judea in the place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. And being warned in a dream, he withdrew to the district of Galilee, and he went and lived in the city Nazareth, so that what was spoken by the prophets might be fulfilled, that he would be called a Nazarene. And so Archelaus is going to rule over, I'll show you a map here in a minute, but he's going to rule over the southern areas. Remember, Judea's southern Israel. It's that mountainous, deserty kind of land. It's where Jerusalem is. Samaria is going to be like there in the middle, sandwiched between Galilee and Judea. Idumea is below. It's where the Edomites are. It's below Judea. And so he's going to rule down there, down south. And his rule is going to be not great. The people are not going to be big fans of Archelaus. He's going to scandalize the Jews. And the first mark against him is that his mother is not a Jew. She's a Samaritan. And if you remember, a couple of generations back, there was the decree by Hillel and Shammai that Jewish lineage is matrilineal, right? It goes through the mother's line. And so he is not going to be seen as a Jew by the people. He's going to be seen as a Samaritan. And the Jews of Judea are going to have a problem with that. He's going to be somebody that with a lot of Herod's bad actions that he did would have been carried out by Archelaus. And so he carries some stains over from his father. When he takes the throne, there's protesters about his ascension, and so he has 3,000 of them executed. And not just executed, he has them executed in the temple. And not just in the temple, he has them executed during Passover. So about the worst time you could imagine for killing some of your enemies that are your people during a religious holiday in the holy temple. So he gets off on a bad foot. And he's going to have some other issues in that he changes the high priesthood when he wants to change it. And you can look at that list I gave you guys of the high priesthood. There's quite a bit of changing that goes on. And finally, the straw that really kind of breaks the camel's back of all the many straws, there's his marriage to a woman named Glaphyra. And what a cool name. But he marries her, and there's a problem, which is she was the wife of his half-brother Alexander, or his half-uncle Alexander, who was previously killed. And then when he was killed, she remarried somebody else, and she divorced him to marry her. I don't even know what you call it. She divorced him to marry Archelaus, and so there's scandal there too. He's in a bad marriage. He's not a Jew. He's cruel and kills people. And so when all of this happens, the Jews are going to rise up and they're going to send a delegation to Rome and say, hey, this guy is awful. We don't want him here. The Sanhedrin's gonna rally around and send this message to the Roman government. And the Roman government's going to say, okay, what does Rome want above all else? Peace. Cut it out. And so they're going to tell Archelaus, listen, just get out. And he's going to be exiled to, I believe, Gaul, which is like modern day France type area. And so there's a problem here, though, which is that when Herod divided the kingdom among tetrarchs and he didn't give it to a single heir, you have a bit of a power vacuum. If one of his descendants were to leave or abdicate the throne or whatever might happen, Rome has the ability to step in and claim their own authority. And that's exactly what they do. So when Archelaus abdicates the throne, Rome sees an opportunity and says, okay, we'll send, we're going to take over for you. And so, kind of ironically, the Sanhedrin, which is so upset about Archelaus and have some authority over Archelaus because they had some authority over the Sanhedrin, over the Tetrarchy, they kind of, they get rid of him, but they're really not doing themselves a favor because now Rome steps in and they lose a lot of the power that they had. And so Judea, ironically, is going to be the first of all the different kingdoms, territories, I guess, that's going to be ruled by Rome. And so Archelaus is short-lived. You got Philip II, and he's Philip II because his brother, Herod II, Boethius Philip I, what a name, by the way. He's out. So Philip II is going to be the second of the three tetrarchs. He's going to rule for quite a long time, starting 4 BC all the way up to 34 AD. He's going to rule over Botania, Iturea, Trachonitis, and you might be thinking, where on earth are those places? I'll show you a map here in a minute. It's north and it's east of Israel. And so he's going to rule over those places, and he's going to be a pretty good ruler. He's not going to have all the worst habits of like Herod, his dad. Herod was so paranoid and so power hungry and all of those things. Philip's going to be pretty good. And so he's going to be known largely because he rebuilt Caesarea Philippi. Which is going to be an important place that we read about in the New Testament. There was a city there, but it was kind of in ruins. He rebuilt it, built it up, made it bigger and better, and renamed it after Caesar, Caesarea, and then after himself, Philippi. And so Philip's going to be a pretty good ruler, and not too terribly noteworthy. He is good friends with the emperor, it seems, and he's a pretty good ruler. Then you got Herod Antipas. And all of these names, the Bible will refer to these people sometimes by their, these particular names, but all of these people take the name Herod. And so when I say Herod, like if you read the word Herod in the Bible, it sometimes refers to all of these people. And so just for extra layer of confusion. But Antipas is going to rule in 4 BC, and he's going to go all the way up to 39 AD. Antipas is going to be the Herod that you're going to have probably the most interaction with in the Bible. He rules over Galilee and Perea. Do you know where Perea is? It's on the east side of the Jordan. And so you probably, I'll show you a map here in a second. But he's going to rule over Galilee and Perea, and it's kind of a strange two lands because they're not really connected to each other. But they're connected through the Sea of Galilee, but it's a strange land. He's going to be the one that kills John the Baptist. So look in your Bibles. Look at Mark chapter 6, verse 17 through 29. For it was Herod who had sent and seized John and bound him in prison for the sake of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, because he had married her. For John had been saying to Herod, "It is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife." And Herodias had a grudge against him and wanted to put him to death, but she could not. For Herod feared John, knowing that he was a righteous and holy man. And he kept him safe. When he heard him, he was greatly perplexed. Yet he heard him gladly. And then we won't read it, but go on and you see the banquet scene, and Herodias' daughter Salome comes and dances before him, and he gives the head of John the Baptist on a silver platter. Great family you got. And then he's also going to be the one that tries Jesus. So when Jesus is being bounced back and forth between Pilate and Herod, he's going to be the Herod that's being talked about there. It's Herod Antipas. Look at Luke 23, if you would, verses 6 through 9. When Pilate heard this, he asked whether the man was a Galilean. And when he learned that he belonged to Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him over to Herod, who was himself in Jerusalem at that time. When Herod saw Jesus, he was very glad, for he had desired to see him because he had heard about him and was hoping to see some sign done by him. So he questioned him at length, but he made no answer. The chief priests, the scribes, stood by vehemently accusing him, and Herod and his soldiers treated him with contempt and mocked him. Then arraying him in a splendid clothing, he sent him back to Pilate. And Herod and Pilate became friends with each other that very day. For before this, they had been at enmity with each other. So Pilate tries to wash his hands of the Jesus problem, right? He doesn't see any fault and all of that. And so he sends him to Herod Antipas, because Herod Antipas is the governor of Galilee. And Jesus is a Galilean, right? He's from Nazareth. And so he falls under the jurisdiction of Antipas, and it's just very convenient that Antipas happens to be in Jerusalem. Why is he in Jerusalem? Passover, yeah. And so it's convenient, and so he sees an opportunity to wash his hands and to get out of this pickle, and so he takes it. And so Herod Antipas is going to be the one you interact with the most. Jesus calls him in Luke 13, he calls him that fox, which is kind of an interesting insult, I guess. But he's going to be the one that you probably see the most. So with the tetrarchs, this is the territory that they're going to have. It might be kind of small for you guys to see. This red, this is Judea, Idumea right there. This is going to be the territory of Archelaus. Right here is Perea, and right there is Galilee. That's going to be the territory of Antipas. This is the Decapolis, which is going to be like Roman control. And this area right here is where Philip's going to be. So if that helps to kind of visualize the breakdown. See, it's kind of weird that Galilee is up there and Perea is down there, and yet you got one guy controlling two sections of land that aren't really connected to each other very well. But that's what's going to happen. And it's also interesting, the biggest and most powerful and most important area of Judea is going to be the first to fall. And so when Pilate comes in and you have all the Roman procurators that come in, they come in for Judea at first. Any thoughts about any of that? Okay. Well, changes under... that says Judean rule. Changes under Roman rule is what I meant for it to say. Taxation. You're going to have taxes are going to change. And we talked about some of these things a couple weeks ago. But taxation is going to be a big thing. You're going to have all sorts of Roman taxes that are now being applied to Jewish citizens that weren't applied before. Before, Judea was what was called a client kingdom. Their king was a servant of Rome, but they weren't technically like a Roman-controlled province. They had some autonomy. Well, that's going to change when Rome steps in and starts governing. So taxation is going to change. There's going to be poll taxes and land taxes, and land taxes are going to be particularly challenging for Israelites. Why might that be? So what Rome would do is they would say, you own this much land, so you owe us such and such money because of the land you own. What might the problem be with that for the Jews? Not because they don't have Roman money. Good thought, though. It's because Jews don't view themselves as owning the land in the same way that Romans do. Remember, you got the year of Jubilee, where you return the land to the rightful tribe and all of that kind of thing. And so this is going to be a problem because they don't view themselves as owning land. And so that's like there's a definitional misconnect here. And so that's going to be a problem. And the solution is wealth tax. We're going to tax your income. And so they're granted some leeway on that. But instead their income is taxed. And so that's going to be its own set of issues. Because how do you know how much people bring in? Wouldn't it be easier to hide your income than it is to hide the land you own? And so there's going to be suspicion that Jews aren't paying their fair share. And so, just take a little bit more, in case they're hiding some. So that's going to be an issue. Governance is going to change drastically. So up until this point, the Sanhedrin, the council of elders, they had a lot of authority, and they had authority even over the tetrarchs. You remember they cast away Archelaus because he was not being a very good ruler. And so the Sanhedrin cast him away, kind of sealing their own coffin though. But now you've got the procurator. The Roman official that's now the governor of the territory, he's going to have authority over the Sanhedrin. And the Sanhedrin is going to lose a lot of the power that they used to have. For instance, notably throughout the Bible, the Sanhedrin can't put you to death without the authority of the Roman government now. And so that's going to be an issue because the Sanhedrin wants to kill Jesus, right? But they can't just do it. They have to go through Pilate. And so Pilate ends up having some say. So that's going to be an issue. The Sanhedrin's laws aren't going to have the same potency, and their rulings aren't going to have the same potency that they used to have. You're going to have an issue with military power because what's the duty of a king? To protect your territory. You're like the commander in chief. Well, now you don't have a tetrarch, you have a procurator, and the procurator is going to hold military power, and in particular, Roman military power, which is the scariest military power. And so the procurators are going to come in, and they're going to come in with legions, and they're going to come in with their own military and their own soldiers. And so there's going to be a much greater Roman soldier presence than there was before. And often the priorities of a Roman procurator aren't going to align with the priorities of the Jewish populace. And so you're going to have some blood that's shed. And you see that in the Bible. Religious power. Procurators are going to be able to appoint high priests. And that's going to be a really big sticking point of contention. So before we get to Pilate, let's talk about the Roman procurator before Pilate. I should have put a slide up. A guy by the name of Valerius Gratus. He was procurator from 15 AD to 26 AD. When you may flip back and look at that list of high priests that's in the back, but when Valerius takes power, he's not too fond of the current high priest and wants to put in his own high priest. The high priest that he removes from power is a man by the name of Annas, which might sound a little bit familiar to you. And so finally he goes through and puts in every year of his rule for quite some time, he puts in a new high priest. And then he decides, I don't like this guy, I'll get a new one next year. I don't like this guy, I'll get a new one next year. And he does that until he finally finds one that he likes, a high priest by the name of Caiaphas. And so you have Annas and Caiaphas. And is there a relationship between the two? There is. Annas is the father-in-law of Caiaphas. And so there's going to be, well, flip over. Look at John chapter 18. We'll just read it. John chapter 18, pick up verse 12. So the band when Jesus is being arrested and betrayed, so the band of soldiers and their captain and the officers of the Jews arrested Jesus and bound him. First they led him to Annas, for he was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year. It was Caiaphas who advised the Jews that it would be expedient that one man should die for the people. And so they take Jesus, they arrest him, and they bring him to Annas first, and then to Caiaphas. Because there's some power dynamics there that need to be worked out. It could be that they saw Annas as the more legitimate high priest because he served previously before this new guy comes in and starts, rifling through people as he wishes, but also because he's his father-in-law. There's some power dynamics there. One way or the other, he goes before both, and Caiaphas is the one that says, we should kill him, and so that's going to be an issue. So after Gratus leaves power, you're going to have the introduction to the man named Pilate. Pilate's going to be an incompetent guy. You get some interesting points of view on Pilate. Some people think that he was like a almost proto-Christian because he didn't find any fault in Jesus, and so he was, although he didn't do what he should have done, he wasn't implicitly against Jesus. Some people take that view, and I don't know. I think Pilate just wanted the problem to stop. I think he's kind of cowardly in a lot of ways, but I think above all, he just wanted peace, and he just wanted to get this over with and make it stop. And Pilate's going to do quite a few things throughout his tenure as procurator that are going to cause a lot of headaches for the people, and they're going to make a lot of people angry. He's going to introduce Roman flags or like insignias type things to Jerusalem. And that's going to be a big problem because what do we know about Romans? they're pagans. And so you're going to put big pagan iconography, basically, all over Jerusalem. Well, the Jewish people aren't going to be happy about that, and they're going to make that known. He's going to be somebody that finances an aqueduct. Water is pretty scarce in Jerusalem. There's not any big major river that runs through it or anything. And so he's going to make an aqueduct to carry water from, I don't know where he's getting the water from, but to bring water into Jerusalem. And he does that by doing what everybody else has done so far, which is take money from the temple treasury. Take money that's not yours. And so that's going to cause a problem, because the temple is where you save money. If you want to put some money in, there's not banks. If you want to save money that's not just digging a hole in your backyard, you put it in the temple treasury. This is the money that belongs to God. And so he's just going to go and take what he wants and build this aqueduct. He's going to... Coinage is a big thing with the taxation rights. The right of Israel to make their own coins is revoked, and he's going to be the one who makes the coins now. And Judea is going to use Roman coins. But the problem there is Roman coins have pagan iconography on them. And so that's going to be scandalous to the Jews. They don't want to use money that's got pagan idols stuff on it. So that's going to be a problem. He put shields bearing the image of the emperor in Jerusalem. Kind of similar to the first issue. You've got the face of the emperor all over Jerusalem. What's the problem with that? Emperor cult worship is a thing. And so the emperor himself is deified. And so that's scandalous. And then we have in Luke recorded the fact that he mingled the blood of the Galileans with sacrifices. And what that means, I don't know. Probably there was some event where people were killed as they were sacrificing. And that would have been an abomination to the Jews, obviously. That would have been an abomination to the Romans, too. And so, that's a mean thing to do. And Pilate did it. And so there's going to be a lot of reasons why people don't like Pilate. The whole interaction with Pilate and Jesus is a part of that, but it's even bigger than his interaction with Jesus. Obviously, the Christians and the new Christians are going to be unhappy with him for that, but Pilate is just wanting to make peace with that, and he just wants the problem to go away. So how does Pilate hang around for so long? Part of that is he's friends with Sejanus. Sejanus is the commander of the Praetorian Guard up in Rome. He's a really powerful guy. In fact, he's so powerful, he gets away with killing quite a few of the people who should be under his care that he didn't want to take the Roman emperorship after Tiberius died. So Sejanus is kind of a betrayer, kind of bad figure. But he's a notable Jew hater. And he hates the Jews, and he makes that loud and clear from his position in Rome. And he's good friends with Pilate. And so despite his questionableness, his support would be a big deal. But also, during the rule of Pilate, there's not a governor in Syria. There's a vacancy. Syria is kind of seen as the overarching region, right? And so, you have a very poor analogy, I guess. Tennessee is a part of the United States. It'd be like Pilate being governor of Tennessee, whereas somebody who's over Syria would be over the United States, which reported to Rome, which rules the world. I don't know. So that's a bad analogy. But Syria would have overseen what happens in Judea. And there's not a governor in Judea. And so what happens when you don't have good oversight? Things can slide a little bit, right? And so Pilate is really not a good ruler. But because there's no one to really keep him in check and nobody checking in on him, whereas he probably would have gotten kicked out a long time ago, he gets to rule a little bit longer than perhaps some of these other guys. But he's going to be in power for about 10 years, from 26 to 36. So let's, as we begin to start wrapping up, let's talk about some of the last kings and procurators. There's going to be two more kings of Israel. And the word king there is intentional. Not ethnarchs, not tetrarchs, but they're going to be kings. The first is Agrippa the First. Agrippa is the son of, oh my goodness, go back and look at it. I'm going to missay it if I don't look. Agrippa the First is the son of Aristobulus, and so he's the grandson of Herod. He's the grandson of Mariamne, who's the last of the Hasmoneans. He's going to be an important person. He's not going to have been raised in Judea, though, which is kind of an interesting fact. He's going to have been raised in Rome as a Roman hostage. One of the things Rome likes to do is when they conquer a land, they like to take a lot of the nobility's children and say, we're just going to keep them here and we're going to raise them here just in case you get any ideas. And if you do, they're dead. So Agrippa grew up as a hostage in Rome, kind of ensuring the loyalty of Judea. But he's going to, in his time in Rome, he's going to make friends with some important people. He's going to make friends with Claudius, who you might recognize as the Emperor Claudius before he was the Emperor Claudius. He's going to make friends with Caligula, who is Claudius's nephew. And when Tiberius dies, Tiberius is the emperor who's emperor during the life of Christ, for at least the latter life of Christ. When Tiberius dies, Caligula, his nephew, is going to become emperor. And we could talk a long time about Caligula. He was a crazy dude. Like, he was seriously unstable. And did really, really terrible, horrible things. Here's a little tidbit for you, though. Caligula means little boots. So his dad was named Germanicus, and he was a great general. And he would go see his dad on the battlefield at camp, and he would dress up in his old like a Roman soldier outfit, but for like a toddler. And he became loved by all the people. And they call him Little Boots because he's just little boots behind his dad. But then he grows up to be just this absolute monster of a person who does really atrocious and terrible things. But he's good friends with Agrippa. And so Agrippa is eventually going to... Agrippa's an interesting guy. He's one of those people that seems to fail up. And, you have politicians at times that fail up. They fail and somehow get promoted and then do a bad job and then somehow get promoted and just keep getting promoted. That's going to be Agrippa's political career. But eventually he's going to make his way and be declared king over Judea. And he's going to be actually really loved by the people. Despite the fact that he didn't grow up in Judea, the people are going to genuinely love him. He's going to speak Hebrew. And there's a story about he's leading a worship assembly and he reads Hebrew and he reads this passage. I think it's from Deuteronomy, and he begins to weep. And then Rabbi Gamaliel of, Paul studied under Gamaliel. He embraces him and calls him brother, and it's like this big emotional scene. But the Jews are going to love Agrippa because he's actually a pretty good king, despite some of his eccentricities. He's going to be liked by the Romans because he's good friends with the Romans. His death is going to be very interesting. It's going to be a fascinating death. I have Acts chapter 20 up there. That's wrong. It's Acts chapter 12. Turn your Bibles. Look at Acts chapter 12. Pick up verse 20. Now Herod was angry with the people of Tyre and Sidon, and they came with one accord, and having persuaded Blastus, the king's chamberlain, they asked for peace, and because their country had depended on the king's country for food. On an appointed day, Herod put his royal robes on and took a seat upon the throne and delivered an oration to them. And the people were shouting, "The voice of a God and not of a man." And immediately an angel of the Lord struck him down because he did not give God the glory. And he was eaten by worms and breathed his last. But the word of the Lord increased and multiplied. And so you had this interesting scene where Agrippa, who's loved by the Jews, he gives out this big speech, and the people are so moved. They say, listen, this guy's not talking like him. He's a god. And Agrippa says, well, maybe I am. And so when he does that, an angel strikes him dead. You have a fascinating and identical account in Josephus. Josephus, Antiquities of the Jews, book 19, chapter 8, verse 2, section 2, I guess, for all of those of you following along in your copies of Josephus that I know you all brought. This is what it says. But he presently afterward looked up, after giving his speech, he saw an owl. We'll talk about the owl in a second, sitting on a certain rope over his head, and immediately understood that this bird was the messenger of ill tidings, as it once had been a messenger of good tidings to him, and fell into the deepest sorrow. A severe pain also arose in his belly, and began in a most violent manner. He therefore looked upon his friends and said, I, whom you call a god, am commanded presently to depart this life. While providence thus reproves the lying words that you just now said to me, and I, who was by you called immortal, am immediately to be hurried away to death. And so he dies. And so what Josephus recounts is essentially the exact same thing, the difference being an owl versus an angel, which Josephus is not writing to Jews, he's writing to Romans. And so the idea of an angel would be kind of foreign or weird to a Roman, and so he probably changes it to an owl. And there's a Josephus, if you read earlier in Agrippa's life, he had this encounter with an owl that the prophets came to him and said, because you saw this owl, you'll have a long career as a king and all that, but when you see it again, you'll die. So it's just interesting. I don't know what to make all that. I tend to agree with the Bible, not Josephus on that. But it's fascinating because they report the same thing. Josephus is writing to a Roman audience. He's not going to talk about angels, but he will talk about omens, which which Romans believe the owl would be an omen. So. Interesting, but Agrippa is going to die. He was a good king by and large, we're going to skip forward just a little bit before we talk about Agrippa II, his son, who's going to take over after him. You have Antonius Felix, who's going to be procurator in 52 to 60 AD. You're going to see him in the book of Acts. In Acts chapter 24, verse 22, you have this interaction between Felix and Paul. Sorry, I got a frog in my throat. And in chapter 24, verse 22, he's going to arrest Paul and keep him for some time until he ends up getting repositioned and leaves the procuratorship. Felix is married to Agrippa II's sister, Drusilla. And so he's going to be the son-in-law of Agrippa I, which is an interesting interaction. You got Porcius Festus, which, if you're looking for any baby names, might I recommend Porcius. Porcius is going to be somebody who has a little bit more of a role in the Bible. You're going to see him interact. Well, let's back up. I'm getting ahead of myself. During the rule of Felix, let me get this going. During the rule of Felix, you're going to have tensions begin to start growing among the populace. There's going to be people are getting tired of Romans. Again, you're going to have the Sicarii, the daggermen that start causing trouble. They're going to assassinate the high priest. and there's going to be a lot of tensions. There's going to be several figures that start popping up around this time that claim to be messianic figures, aside from Jesus, not just Jesus, but people that are false claimants to be messianic figures. You're going to have a guy, there's this interesting interaction. An Egyptian, is what Josephus says, goes up on the Mount of Olives and promises to bring down the walls of Jerusalem. And kind of sounds familiar. And Felix is going to take some troops, and he's going to go put down that rebellion before it even really gets off the ground. But people are starting to be unhappy, and they're starting to grow restless. You're starting to have some like terroristic groups that are beginning to be formed, which are going to really exacerbate things here pretty soon. You got Porcius Festus, ruled for 2 years. During his rule, there was Josephus says, a certain prophet claimed that whoever would follow him into the desert would be saved. And so Festus goes off and kills him. And all his followers. But there's this interesting interaction that goes on during the rule of Festus. Agrippa II was supposed to oversee all the goings on at the temple. And so he builds this tower to go look up and observe the things that are happening on the Temple Mount. And the Jews don't want him spying on them. So you know what they do? They build a wall, and they build a wall so that he can't oversee it. And then he builds it a little higher, and they build it a little higher. And eventually they're just squabbling and fighting. And so they go to Festus, and Festus says, oh, listen, this is out of my hands. So they go and appeal to Nero, the emperor. And Nero says, listen, the wall can stay. It doesn't matter. Just stop fighting, which is kind of funny. They're squabbling, that kind of thing. But he hears Paul plead his case alongside of Agrippa II in Acts chapter 26. So you're going to then have Agrippa II, who's going to rule for a really long time. From 50 AD all the way to 92 AD, which is shocking in part because what's the big event that's going to happen in his rule? The destruction of Jerusalem. How on earth do you manage to stay a hold of your throne when Rome comes marching in? He's going to do it. He's going to swap sides when he needs to swap sides. But he's going to be interesting. He's going to be liked by the Jews and the Greeks. He's going to keep his rule. He's in a gross incestuous marriage with his sister, Bernice, or Bernike, if you do a hard C or not. Paul's going to plead his case before him. So look at Acts chapter 26, verse 24 through 29. So Paul goes through and he tells his whole story of his conversion and all of those things. Pick up verse 24. And as he was saying these things in his defense, Festus said with a loud voice, Paul, you're out of your mind. Your great learning is driving you out of your mind. And Paul said, I'm not out of my mind, most excellent Festus, but I'm speaking true and rational words. For the king, who's the king? Agrippa. For the king knows about these things, and to him I speak boldly. For I am persuaded that none of these things has escaped his notice. For this has not been done in a corner. King Agrippa, do you believe the prophets? I know that you believe. And Agrippa said to Paul, in a short time, would you persuade me to be a Christian? And Paul said, whether short or long, I would to God that not only you, but also all who hear me this day might become such as I am, except for these chains. And so you have this interaction where Paul gives his conversion account. It has preached essentially before this council of Festus, the procurator, and Agrippa II, the king, and has said all these things. And he turns to Agrippa and says, listen, you're a Jew. You believe the prophets. I know you do because you're a Jew. You're a practicing Jew. And he was. He may not have been the best Jew, but he was a Jew. And he says, listen, did these things not convince you? And what's Agrippa's reply? Yeah. Here's where I pop your bubble. Is Agrippa saying, oh man, I'm almost a Christian. Just go on a little bit more and I'll be there. What's Agrippa saying? He's being sarcastic. He's not saying he's convinced. He says, Paul, in such a short time, are you going to really convince me to be a Christian? You're not. And in the Greek, it's pretty clear. This is not the King James is the only translation that makes it sound as if, almost persuaded. He's not saying that he's almost there, but he's being sarcastic. He's being dismissive. And so he says, do you really think that you can convince me to act like a Christian? And Paul says, I wish that everybody here would, except for the chains that I'm bearing. Did I just pop your bubble? We can still sing the invitation song if you want. It's still a good song. So Agrippa II is going to rule for a long time, and we're going to leave off here in a second. Let's just talk one more about the final two procurators that lead up to this rebellion, which we'll talk about next week. You got a guy by the name of Albinus and Gessius Florus, and the two of them are just terrible managers. And so Albinus is going to execute a lot of the Sicarii because they've been kidnapping government officials and doing all kinds of damage. They're a terrorist group, but his execution of them is going to just make them double down, and they're going to get worse. And then he's going to be short-lived, just there for like 2 years. And then Florus is going to come in. He's a bad leader at the get-go. He doesn't care a thing about the Jews, and he doesn't put down the seeds of rebellion that are really getting fanned up and flaming right now. And he just lets it grow and fester until it becomes something that's just way out of his control. And with the end of Florus's rule, 66, you're going to have the beginning of the Jewish rebellion, which is going to ultimately result in the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. And so there's a lot that's going to be at stake. There's a lot that happens. There's a lot of tensions in this time. By and large, though, this time's really not been nearly as bad as some other times throughout history, which we've looked at. But the rule of Agrippa the first and Agrippa the second are going to be seen as pretty good times, despite all the bad things that happen. They're going to be really I've said this before, that they're going to be the last breath of Jewish independence. They're the last of the Hasmoneans. They're both related all the way back to Judas Maccabeus, which you can go back. They're going to be the last ones. They're the last kings of Judah. And after the Great Revolt and after the Bar Kokhba rebellion, any hope for Jewish autonomy is going to be quashed up until 1948.